Bibles this morning to Daniel chapter number 3. Daniel chapter number 3 in our Bibles. And if you'd like to follow along with the sermon notes, there's a QR code on the screen behind me, as well as in our bulletins, that you can follow along with the sermon notes. In our previous lesson of Daniel, we saw that Nebuchadnezzar had built a giant statue, and he called all the leaders of his empire to the dedication service. King Nebuchadnezzar commanded that all the leaders would bow down and worship this statue. Disobedience and the failure to bow down would result in being cast into a fiery furnace, likely a brick kiln, and cremated while alive. I'm sure most of you are aware of this event, and you know that three Jewish officials, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, better known by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refused to bow down, declaring their allegiance to the one true God. Some of the Babylonian leaders, likely unhappy that these Jewish men had been placed in leadership after Daniel's interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, tattled on these three guys and went to King Nebuchadnezzar and said, "They're not bowing down," with the hopes of getting rid of them. Upon hearing that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were not bowing down, the king became furious, and he ordered them to be thrown into a blazing furnace. The heat was so intense that the men that threw them in perished. However, when King Nebuchadnezzar looked inside of the furnace, he was astonished not to see three, but four men walking around unharmed in the flames of the furnace. The fourth figure, according to King Nebuchadnezzar, had the form of the Son of God. And this man, this Son of God, had protected these three men. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah emerged from the furnace unscathed. Their clothes and hair not even singed, not even smelling like smoke. That's a miracle. That's unbelievable that their clothes didn't even smell like smoke after being in a fire. I was telling Erica just this morning, we were gone for a couple days, went up to Luray, had a nice little time away as a family. We built a fire pit, and the smoke was everywhere. And clothes that I put on this morning that I didn't even wear during the time at the fire pit, that had already been washed, I put on this morning, and they still had the smell of smoke. I mean, smoke just sticks around everywhere. And these guys came out of the fiery furnace, not even smelling like smoke. Witnessing this miracle, King Nebuchadnezzar acknowledged the power of their God and decreed that no one should ever speak against Jehovah God. In this event, we find these three Jewish men in a very difficult situation. They had a huge problem. It was a life or death situation for them. But how they responded to this problem, to this difficulty in their life, is absolutely amazing. Look with me in Daniel chapter number 3 and verse number 14. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, and the dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, but if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up." We read this response by these three guys, and we wonder, I wonder if I would respond the same way as them. I hope so. I'd love to be able to say I would, but am I really sure that I would respond the same way? We see how that we respond when we have a little bit of car trouble. We see how we respond when our spouse doesn't react the way that we want to, or when our kids do something we don't like, or when things come up at work, little problems, and we see how poorly we respond to these small problems in our lives compared to the problem that these three guys had. And we begin to doubt if we would respond the same way that they did here in this situation. I want to share with you this morning 3 different observations about this event that I hope that will be able to be a benefit to us to learn how to respond properly to difficulties, to problems in our lives. So often it seems we see problems as negative things in our life. But if we just change our perspective on it and understand that problems are not negative, that problems produce positive things in our life, we can learn not only to survive through problems, but to thrive through problems as well. But before we look at this situation and how to respond to problems, I just want to address a question that many of us have when we read through this passage. Where was Daniel? Why was he not mentioned here? Did he bow down? Was he willing to bow down to this false idol that was set up? Was he away on a trip? And the reality of it is that the Bible doesn't tell us. We don't have an answer. It's fun to speculate and it's interesting to think about, but the Bible does not give a definitive answer to us. Most Bible scholars say it's obvious that Daniel wasn't there because he surely would not have bowed down just like the other Hebrew men. They say there's no way that Daniel would have acted like the world around him. We see how Daniel early in his life was not willing to defile himself with the king's meat. We see later on when there was an ordinance given that they shouldn't pray, that Daniel opened the windows and was willingly praying to his God. But I just want us to make sure we're careful about assumptions. You know, Daniel was a man just like the rest of us. David was a man after God's own heart, and yet David committed adultery and killed someone to cover it up. Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, was an immoral man. Peter denied Jesus Christ. Moses disobeyed. Abraham lied to save his life. These were our great heroes of the faith, but they were just like us. And they had sin just like us. And so I don't know if Daniel bowed down. I would be surprised if he did bow down. But would it shake my faith if he ended up bowing down, if I find that out? No, not at all. I know he would have been tempted to save his life, but we don't know what he ended up doing. And so whatever the reason, God doesn't deem it important enough to include it in this passage about who Daniel was and where he was and what he did. And so we can speculate, but it doesn't do us a lot of benefit. I just wanted to address that because I know it's a question that many of us have. But I want us to focus this morning on what we do know about this story, about these 3 men and how they responded to the problems in their life. First of all, we see problems produce confidence. As we read already in verse number 16 of chapter 3, the men Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor worship the golden image which you have set up." We read these verses and we think, wow, what faith. But we have to remember that this was not the first time that these 3 men had been tested. This was not the first time that their lives had been put in danger. These 3 young men were dragged out of their homes in Jerusalem and taken to a foreign country. They were mutilated. They were pressured to conform to the new culture and to worship the gods of other nations. One time they had refused to eat the king's food like Daniel, and God blessed them for it. Another time they had been threatened with death along with the other king's counselors if they couldn't reveal or interpret the king's dream. And then they saw God perform a miracle and give their friend Daniel the answer to this dream of what it was about. And as a result, they were placed in a place of authority, in a position of authority, and that really put them in a position that we find in this story this morning. It said in verse number 2 of chapter 3, it says, "Then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, sent to gather together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up." And so these were the who's who of Babylon. These were the important people, counselors, princes, ones in positions of power and authority. The fact that Daniel had been able to interpret the dream and asked that these three guys be given a place of authority, put them in the very situation that we find them in this morning. These guys have been through so much difficulty. They had been through so many trials, and they had seen God deliver them over and over again. Would they have had such faith if it were not for the previous experiences? Maybe, maybe not. But I'm sure it was easier for them to trust God during this trial of their life after they had gone through the previous experiences, because problems and seeing God work through those problems produce confidence in our hearts. It produces confidence in our lives. After seeing God solve one problem after another, it helps us to stop worrying about what may or may not happen during a present problem. We know that God is in control and that we can trust him. By seeing God work through previous problems, these guys were well aware that their God was real, that their God was able to answer their prayer requests, that their God was able to help them through whatever situation. Maybe they doubted that reality after Babylon destroyed Jerusalem and they were carried out of their homes. Maybe they were wondering, where is God? What's he doing? Is he really real? Is he really able to accomplish things as they were carried off into captivity? But now, after 20 or 30 years of seeing God do amazing and great things, they knew who he was. They knew that he was a real God. They knew that he had the power to deliver them. There was no way they were going to reject Jehovah God now to serve the false idols of Babylon. They knew from personal experience that Jehovah God was real. See, the previous problems in their lives produced a confidence in their hearts that God was able to deliver them. And the problem that you're facing right now will create and can create even more confidence in your heart toward God. When we face problems, instead of complaining, let's give thanks to God. Let us thank him that he's producing another opportunity for us to be able to grow in our faith and confidence of him, to be able to watch how he is able to work through this situation. Now, he might not work the way we want. He might not get us out of the situation in a way that we think is best, but we will see God's hand at work in this situation. We will see God do great things. And as we watch him, you know what happens in our hearts? We grow in our faith and we see that our God is able. Our God can get us through situations. These guys knew and had confidence in God from previous trials in their life. And after seeing God work in our lives and through our problems, we can grow in our faith. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah trusted their God in the face of impending death. Why? Because they had seen God help them through previous problems. Their problems produced confidence in God. And your problems, whatever they may be, can produce confidence in your life, in your God. So our problems produce confidence. Number two, they also produce miracles. Look with me in verse number 19. It says, "Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." Now, if you've ever seen your dad get angry, you understand that. His face changed. He was just angry at these guys. How dare they reject what he's told them to do? And how dare they do it to his face and tell him, we don't think you're as powerful as our God. And we think our God is better than your God. It made him so angry. It says his visage was changed. Therefore he spake and commanded they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He wanted to make sure they couldn't get out. The most mighty men in his army, make sure these guys are tied up tightly and they can't get out of this situation. And he told them to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. And then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. And he answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. After throwing these 3 men into the fire, something very strange happened. The king looks into the fire, and instead of seeing them writhing in pain, he saw them out just for a morning stroll, just walking around in the midst of the fire like it was no big deal. And now it wasn't just 3 of them. There was a 4th man with him, and the 4th looked different, and the Bible doesn't tell us what was about him, what was so different about him, why he looked so different. But the king said he didn't look like normal men. He looked like the Son of God. Now, we don't know if this was the pre-incarnate Christ in a Christophany, in a human form, before he came down to this earth, or if it was an angel that God sent down to be with him. But we do know that it was God who was the one that protected them. The men were completely protected by God. As I mentioned, they didn't even smell like smoke when they came out of the fire. The fire did not have any impact on them. The Bible says they were cast in with all their clothes, and they came out fully dressed. The fire had no impact on their clothing. As God says in the book of Isaiah, When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee, for I am the Lord thy God. God protected them just like he said. God was watching out for them just as he said. How many of you would have loved to have been there? Wouldn't that have been so cool to see? Wouldn't that have been so awesome to experience? How many of you would have loved to be there when God parted the Red Sea, or when Jesus calmed the waters on the Sea of Galilee, or when Jesus healed the blind man, or when Gideon faced the mighty army with just 300 men with an army of lanterns and trumpets? How exciting it would have been to see these miracles. But how many of us would have liked to have been thrown into the fire with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, not knowing that God was going to deliver them at that moment, not knowing that the angel or the Son of God was about to appear to deliver them? All they could see was the flames they were being thrown into. How many of us would have liked to have been standing on the shore of the Red Sea as the Egyptian army came barreling down toward us, and only place we could go was out into the water? Death was surely about to come. How many of us would have liked to have been in the boat with Jesus Christ as it was crashing up and down in the waves, not knowing that Jesus Christ was about to stand up and calm it with just his word? How many of us would have liked to have been born blind, like the blind man that Jesus Christ was going to heal? See, all of these great miracles were produced by great problems. All of these miracles were produced by problems. Without problems, there's no need for miracles. Without difficulties, there's no need for miracles. Our problems can produce miracles. And so instead of complaining when we're thrown into a fire, why don't we start praising God for what he's about to do through this problem? When our car breaks down, when we lose our job, when we're diagnosed with cancer, let us look at it as an opportunity for God to do a miracle through our situation. Our problems produce miracles. I can't say that I've ever seen God really do a big miracle in my life. I can't say that I've ever seen a blind man receive his sight, or seen a dead person come back to life. But I've seen God do some amazing things. And every single one of those amazing things that I've seen God do has come as a result of a problem in my life. A situation where I was stressed in, where it was difficult for me, and I didn't know how I was going to come out of this. I didn't know how God was going to move. In the midst of the situation, it was difficult. But then I look back now and I see, wow, that was awesome. That was so much fun. My God used this problem to accomplish amazing things for his honor and glory. We've seen bills paid. We've seen buildings built. We've seen God do things that are beyond human capability because he's a miracle working God. And God steps into our problems when we're going through difficulties, when we're going through trying situations, and he does incredible things for his honor and for his glory. So then we can look back and say, oh, I would have loved to have been there. I would have loved to see that. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they were getting cast in that fire, were going, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in this situation. As the Egyptians were on the Red Sea, they're going, I'd rather be anywhere else in the world right now than these Egyptians coming to attack us. We don't like to be in the problems. That's hard. That's difficult. But that is where God does miracles. And so when we find ourselves in these situations, when we find ourselves in these difficulties, if we want to see God do great things, then we must understand that by faith, we have to step into the problem that God has allowed into our lives. These three guys could have bowed down, and that would have resolved their problem. That would have been an easy way out. They could have just compromised and, that's an easy solution. I'm just going to bow down. And we're so tempted to get out of things the easy way when difficulties and trials come our way. But God wants us to step into problems so that he can do what only he can do and produce miracles. And that's what these guys were doing. And their problem produced a miracle. Finally, we see problems produce opportunities. Look with me in verse number 27. And the princes and governors and captains and the king's counselors being gathered together saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their heads singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. Could you imagine what they thought? They had seen these guys cast into the fire. They had seen those soldiers, the mighty men that Nebuchadnezzar had called to bind them and to cast them into the fire. They had seen them die as a result of the flames. And now they see these three Hebrew men walking out of the fires. Could you imagine what they were thinking? Whether they trusted in Jehovah God or not, we don't know. But we do know is they went, whoa, there's something different happening here. What happened with this situation? They were able to see the miracle God produced and went, that's amazing. They saw what God had done. But not only did they see, it says in verse 28, then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any God except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made as a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So after these guys came out of the fire, after they had been tied up, after God had delivered them, the other leaders and Nebuchadnezzar saw what God was able to do. And they said, that's different. Nebuchadnezzar had experience with Jehovah God before. Nebuchadnezzar had seen the mighty hand of God before. He had seen how Jehovah God was able to give Daniel the dream that he had dreamt and the interpretation of that dream. He was convinced after that of the reality and the power of God. He was so convinced that he made a proclamation that anyone who said anything against Jehovah God after seeing Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come out, they would be cut into pieces and their houses would become as garbage dumps. You see, the problems that we face, the problems we go through, produce great opportunities to witness for God. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah told the king that they would not bow down to his statue or any other god. And Nebuchadnezzar was so angry. He was infuriated that they would deny his word. Nobody talked to the king like that. Nobody spoke to him like that. But then Nebuchadnezzar saw what God was able to do and that their God was able to save them, just as they said. They said in verse 17, if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. That had made Nebuchadnezzar so mad. How dare they question him? But now, after the problem and after the miracle, we see Nebuchadnezzar agrees with them. You're right. There's no other God that could do such a thing. Nebuchadnezzar saw that Jehovah God was powerful enough to save them even from his mighty hand. See, you never know what your problems, what opportunities your problems will produce. The blind man didn't know that Jesus was going to heal him and give him the opportunity to stand before the Jewish Sanhedrin and declare who Jesus Christ was. The man had the demonic man that was full of demons, that was healed by Jesus Christ, was later able to return to his village and testify how Jesus was able to change his life. Paul was able to go back into the city of Lystra after being stoned and testify of God's power. Your broken down car might give you an opportunity to speak with a mechanic that you wouldn't have had beforehand. Your health problem might give you an opportunity to speak with medics that beforehand you would have never had interaction with and contact with. Your lost job might produce an opportunity for a new job, and now you'll have new opportunities to connect with people. See, your problems can produce opportunities. Opportunities to stand up for God, opportunities for you to witness for God, and opportunities for God to show himself mighty through your life. I have watched through the years the grace and strength that many of our church members have had as they've gone through various problems and difficulties. And it helps my faith grow. Seeing how you trust God through this problem encourages me. And as other people watch us go through difficulties and problems, it allows opportunities for God to do something great. It allows us to testify of the goodness and grace of God in our lives, to be able to witness to other people of how we can deal with situations because of Jesus Christ, because of what he's done for us. See, our problems often give us opportunities to show just how great our God is. Opportunities that we could have never imagined. Opportunities we wouldn't have asked for. Opportunities that we would have gone about a different way. But God uses our problems and our difficulties to give us opportunities to make a difference for him. See, Nebuchadnezzar went from demanding that everyone worship him and his idol and being infuriated when others disobeyed his word and would worship Jehovah instead of him, to now proclaiming the greatness of God, of Jehovah God. How did it happen? The terrible problem of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah produced an amazing opportunity to reach the most powerful man, the most powerful king in the world. God allowed him to go through a difficult situation to be able to witness to this great king. We often want God to use us, don't we? Don't we want God to use us? We think about it. God, use me to do something great for your glory. But we want him to use us without problems. We want him to use us without having to go through difficult situations and trials and situations that scare us. But God will often use problems in our lives to create opportunities for us to talk about God with others and to show for God how great he is to other people and how he works through our life. See, your problems produce opportunities. See, life is all about perspective. It's about perspective. When we focus on our problems, it causes us to complain, to get angry, to get scared, to miss out on what God wants to do. But when we see our problems as something God uses to bring blessing, to produce blessings, the problems don't bother us as much anymore. Sure, we get a little nervous. Sure, we get a little scared. Sure, life is still difficulty. We're still in this human flesh. But we're able to rejoice in the Lord always because he's a good God. So instead of complaining about a problem, let the problem excite us a little bit. How's God going to use this? What's God going to do through this problem? I can't wait to see what he has planned for this one. And we get to the point that we get to be like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and we say, God can deliver me from this problem. But even if he doesn't, he's still a faithful God. He's still an amazing God. And I'm still going to be faithful to him. And I'm still going to do what he wants me to do because he is so good and so amazing. How do you view your problems? Do you complain over the smallest little hiccups in your life? Do you get upset when things don't go smoothly for you, when they don't go just as you planned? Do you panic when things get hard in your life? Or do you view your problems as an opportunity for God to produce confidence in your heart, for God to produce miracles in your life, and for God to produce opportunities to testify of his greatness? God wants to use and will use our problems. Will you trust him when problems arise? Will you remember that problems produce blessings? Let us pray. Father, thank you for your word.
Thank you for joining us for part of a Sunday service at Community Baptist Church. I hope to meet you soon. May God impress his love upon your heart this week.